I remember the very first time I realized the world didn't see me the way I saw myself. It wasn't loud, it was quiet. A silence that told me I wasn't allowed to be me, that being me was bad and wrong. I think many of us remember that moment, the one where we learned survival before we learned joy. Welcome to Rainbow Country. This isn't just a podcast, it's a record, a living archive of what it means to be queer in so-called Canada. Raw, untouchable, and without translation. I'm your host, Mr. Teri Westerby, a proud neurodivergent transgender man, and this is our very first episode. I started Rainbow Country to collect and protect our stories, the stories of queer and trans people across this land who deserve to be heard in their own words. These stories changed me. They transformed me. They helped me become who I am today. So I wanted to record the voices of those brave enough to share their truth so future generations can hear what came before them and understand the world we were forced to survive in. Because many of us have spent our lives fighting against the world's idea of who we should be. From what we see in media to our families and friendships, in our schools and workplaces, we're told that everyone else knows what's best for us and we should conform to someone else's idea of who we are. For years, this country told us that we had no right to exist. And even now, with laws that promise equality, our systems still fail us. Our society still fails us. We fall through the cracks, denied healthcare, mental health supports, fair education and safety. And for those of us at the intersections, queer and trans and also disabled, racialized, immigrant, or indigenous, those cracks, they only grow wider. And despite all that, we endure. But more than that, we thrive. We build community, we create connection, we love, despite it all. That love, that joy, that simple act of living, it's defiance. But it really shouldn't have to be that way. That's what Rainbow Country is about. The truth of our lives, the ways we've survived, and the beauty we've built anyway. And since I can't ask others to share their stories without sharing my own, that's where we're going to begin. I often wonder if people would think differently if they only knew the whole truth. So here it is, Teri's story, raw and untouchable. Before I begin, I want to recognize that I am recording this podcast on the traditional and stolen territory of the Chukoyak and Palalt First Nations. I will be discussing themes and using language that may be uncomfortable or may be triggering. Please take care of yourself as you listen. Step away if you need. Your safety matters more than finishing this episode. Let's begin. I'm going to cut right to it. I am a transgender man. My pronouns are he and him. I am also neurodivergent. I have ADHD. I'm telling you this for two main reasons. One, it's relevant to who I am and the story I'm about to tell you. And two, I find closets to be really uncomfortable. I don't like hiding parts of myself or feeling like I have to keep big parts of myself a secret, especially just to feel included or to hold on to some sense of power or control over my situation. I believe in radical authenticity. I believe in the power of everyone being their true selves and building a new society, one where we can thrive and do so on our own terms. But I need you to recognize that I can only be radically authentic about who I am as a trans man and be openly myself is because I receive a lot of privileges. Because of who I am and where I live, I face less barriers to living my life as I choose and accessing my personal freedoms afforded to me by the systems that I live in as a Canadian. I am a male presenting descendant of European settlers with light skin and light hair, and my only visible disability is that I wear glasses. I live in a patriarchal nation that was formed from white European nationalism on the back of racist ideologies on stolen land of which my ancestors received and benefited. Because I know that I am safe where I live, I know my neighbors, and I know that they are my peers. I know that I will not face violence or vitriol by sharing who I am with my community and allowing myself to be vulnerable now on this podcast with all of you. I also know that I can keep myself safe if I need to. I have the ability, finances, physical and mental capabilities, network, and legal protections to keep myself safe and remove myself from any situation that I choose to and feel the need to, for the most part. So because of these reasons, I'm able to host this podcast and loudly and proudly proclaim that I am a neurodivergent transgender man. And you can hear and see me for me. And I get to be myself. and none of my story or my identity has to be hidden away. And people who are like me can see themselves reflected in their community and their surroundings and represented in their leadership and on their podcasts. Happy in healthy relationships, succeeding in careers of their choice. This is radical authenticity, and it's what I live and breathe. But it wasn't always this way for me, and it hasn't been a straight line. So strap in, because I'm basically going to tell you my whole life story. I was born in British Columbia, at the tail end of what is now called the Gay Purge, the 40-year era that saw our government investigate and fire thousands of queer people across Canada. And right at the beginning of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, the disease that the then sitting US President Ronald Reagan called the gay plague. Not kidding, that's what he actually called it a lot. And the media picked up on that. This epidemic disproportionately affected gay, bisexual, and trans people, notably men, and saw the systemic mass murder of millions of people across the world. The year was 1987. In 1981, 6 years before I was born, despite homosexuality having been decriminalized for over 20 years, Canada had a Stonewall riot of our own, protesting the endless violence by police towards gay and trans people. 1 year later, in 1982, Canada created the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It was supposed to guarantee equality before and under the law, and yet it did not explicitly list sexual orientation nor gender identity and expression. So I was born into a world where queer people were fired, targeted, harassed, assaulted, jailed, and went unprotected under the law. I would call this government-sanctioned discrimination and violence. I call it that because if the government doesn't protect you under the law, specifically against discrimination, then they are sanctioning the violence and discrimination that you are experiencing, especially when they know about it, track it, and participate in it. This is them suppressing queer people's freedoms. So what kind of a life would my parents expect their queer transgender son to live in a world that was so stacked against him because of who he is? Now, this is one thing I want to be clear about. When I was born, I was assigned female at birth, but my gender identity is a man. There's many different ways that people describe their experiences as transgender. There were no words for queer or transgender back in 1987, at least in British Columbia, Canada, at the time. And so for a female to be born into a family that believed that their daughters could wear pants and be called Teri was not unusual. So there was no alarms that it was anything except a tomboy. But even then, that wasn't really a thing we talked about except at school. So my parents never really were aware of the word queer or transgender or anything like that. So when I was born, it's not like they held me in their arms and said, I'm going to raise my child as queer and transgender. I was born into a family that was like accidentally feminist. I don't think they were intentionally feminist. Like we didn't really talk about feminist ideas or ideologies, but my mom was raised in a very Catholic environment. And so she was very oppressed as a woman. And my grandfather never believed in even educating his daughters. All my aunts and my mom wanted to go to school, and he basically told them there's no point in sending girls to school because they're just going to be moms and be stay-at-home moms. So basically they had no way out. And so my mom met my dad and she moved out and she had 2 children. And then she went on to live the rest of her life because that was what she was supposed to do. And as soon as I was born, she went to college and she went and became a legal secretary. And she did that for the rest of her career. And she sustained us on that career. So I was raised in this family environment that we could do whatever we want. We could be whoever we want. And that's I think in a way that saved me because I grew up in the space where I could wear what I want and for the most part, act how I want. But there were definitely expectations. I asked myself, what are these patriarchal beliefs? How did they affect me as I was growing up? So like, if you think about it, from long before I was born, all the way to today and projecting onward into the future, we've been seeing members of our governments attempting to make policy based on their own personal biases. This is why it's critical to have adequate representation, diverse representation in all positions in government, especially elected positions. If we don't have that, how can we expect our systems to reflect our society and protect us adequately? I was 1 year old in 1988 when NDP MP Sven Robinson became the first MP to ever come out while in office. Let me be clear, Sven Robinson was not the first gay MP. He was the first gay MP to come out while in office. But it was so unlawful, it was so stigmatized to be gay that they just pretended that they weren't. Think about the pain that they lived in, the pain that they caused. I was 1 when the first MP felt that he was safe enough to come out while in office, publicly leading the entire country to understand that gay people, they can be leaders and they can represent us in government. It was profound. I was 5 in 1992 when Canada finally lifted its ban on gay people in the Canadian forces. It wasn't until I was 8 years old, 8 in 1986, that sexual orientation was added to the Canadian Charter to protect the community from discrimination. This means that by grade 2, the chances of me having knowingly met an openly queer teacher, librarian, EA, principal, superintendent, doctor, nurse, administrator, cop, firefighter, dentist, grocery clerk, or any other professional in my realm of existence would be nearly 0. Nor were there any kind of LGBTQ books, representation in my classrooms, or in the media that I watched. But at 8 years old, I had nobody in my life who looked like me or reflected me or my identity at all. Other than the courageous Sven, there was no queer representation in any form of leadership. By 8, a significant amount of your framework of thinking has been established. By 8, I hadn't met a single queer person to my knowledge. I had not met a single person who looked like me or could help me understand who I was or could explain it to me or to my family what I was going through. By 8, my niece at this point is 8. She has expressed so many things to me about her identity and about her interests and about her expression because of what she's experienced in the representation that she's seen in her classroom, in her community, and in the media that she's watched, the books that she's read. They have access to things that I never could, and it just shows me the types of things that I needed so desperately. When I was 8, my best friend was my cousin. We were born 5 weeks apart, and we spent most of our childhood together. And I think the best part about growing up alongside him was that there was really no difference between the two of us. My parents and their parents didn't treat us differently. We were always treated the same in my mind, for the most part, other than having different lives, being different people. I also have a sister. We were just different people, and I would sometimes steal her clothes. She would steal my Harry Potter t-shirts. and so growing up between the people I had in my life who really showed me that you can be who you are and it didn't matter. Most of my life, I didn't really notice that I was a quote unquote a girl, that I was being raised as a girl, air quotes, because that wasn't really the thing. Up until when my grandpa passed, which by the way was around 10, it was just automatic that we would be dressed up in dresses and she would try to do my hair, but my hair just didn't take to any doing. So eventually she just gave up on that and it was just bone straight. And I was too young for things like makeup. So it was really just dresses. And at the time, I just remember feeling like dresses are what you wear on special occasions. And it kind of in hindsight just felt like drag in a way. Like, I was just putting on this whole outfit. It wasn't just a dress, it was a whole outfit. So other than the occasional time that I wore a dress, I wasn't really girly, quote unquote girly. I didn't wear girly things, but mind you, this was the 80s, 90s, right? And this was the time when everyone just wore bright colored spandex and t-shirts. Like things were really changing and transforming fast. So as I was growing up, I was really just living my life as myself. I was really internalizing a lot of things about who I was supposed to be as a person. And I don't think very much of that was associated with my gender, at least consciously. I didn't think because I'm a woman, I have to be friendly. Because I'm a girl, I have to be nice and kind and giving and things like that. The things that are really ingrained in us. And like like I said, grew up around my male cousins. And so we were never taught like, oh, your boy cousins are rough, they're roughhousing and they're allowed to because they're boys. There was none of that. If my cousins were roughhousing, there shouldn't be roughhousing. No, there was no violence in our family, period. It didn't matter if you're a boy or a girl, no violence. So we didn't have that patriarchal, like, oh, boys will be boys. And so it just wasn't ingrained in me so deeply at that time. Like the fact that I felt like a boy or a man didn't come up at all in my childhood. I don't think I could have ever verbalized it unless someone showed me it was an option and totally explained it to me and had a conversation with me about gender at that age and actually talked to me about gender frequently and talked to me about what it was and that it was a choice and who we were was a choice. Unless that was actively happening to me at that age, I could never have come up with it on my own. And I think it's important for me to highlight that because while we do have a lot of stuff in media these days about gender, it's not really explained, at least not in a way that children can understand it. And if you do it from a young age going forward, then it just kind of becomes automatic. They'll start to think about these things as they grow and get older. Like it shouldn't have taken so long for me to get access to this knowledge and start to understand it, because then I was undoing decades of no understanding at all of who I was or my gender. And so not only was I not taught, but there wasn't any representation in media. And so because of this lack of explanation and this lack of inclusion and this lack of representation, as I started getting older, that's when things started to become more obvious to me. By the time I was 12, in 1999, the House of Commons decided against legalizing same-sex marriage. This is about the same time when I started getting teased for being gay or acting too much like a boy in school, right around when high school started. But I was also 12, and this is around the age when you start to dream about having a family and start to set goals for yourself as a person. And how would I have been able to dream for myself or even know who I was when there was no opportunity for marriage? Just basically, the government of Canada just told all of Canadian society that same-sex marriage was not legitimate. And so there was no pictures painted in my life as a child that said, no matter who you are, you can be married and you can grow up and you can have a family with whoever you want. So how could I have envisioned that for myself if it wasn't a part of society's vision? How could I have even known to start exploring that part of myself if it wasn't painted in Canadian way of life? But yet I was being teased for being gay or acting like a boy, which to me wasn't a thing. It was so confusing. But yet as I grew, this is when the differences between me and my cousins and me and other boys started to become extremely noticeable for me. And this is also around the time where you start to mature as a person, sexually and in your mind and socially, and things that start to really impact you socially start to become more real. And the things that you believe about yourself become more real. At this point, what I believed about life was that you could be anything in the world as a girl, but you will always be a girl. It is not possible to be anything else. Just that wasn't even a thought. Just, you will always be a girl. I was around 13 when the Supreme Court of Canada in the year 2000 finally ruled that gay publications were protected by the freedom of speech clauses in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This means that by the time I was in high school, in grade 8, I was still very unlikely to have ever encountered an openly queer person or any queer literature, books about queer people or about queer life. And to my knowledge, I had not. I hadn't accessed any queer literature and hadn't met any queer people. But my gender dysphoria was really starting to affect my life. It was really starting to ramp up. At this point, I started to grow breast buds, and I hadn't yet started my menstrual cycle, but I started to really notice that the girls in school acted one way and the boys in school acted another way. And if you didn't fit in with that you were an outsider and that something was wrong with you. There was a disconnect between what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be and what I felt like I was supposed to be. The things that I think I have to do come from inside me. They came from observation, not from explicitly being told. And so instead of expressing, hey, this is what I feel and this is what I want, and being honest about my feelings, I would just shrivel up inside because there's the expectations of me as to be girly, quote unquote, and to act like all the other girls in my school, quote unquote. And then there's who I really wanted to be, which I never expressed and never really delved into. And so this internal conflict between those two things was really heating up. And to be fair, from grade 8 onward, I always wore t-shirts, pants, shorts, had long hair. And the very last day of high school, I really took a big leap in trying to be more like myself. And I wore one of my dad's polo t-shirts and a clip-on tie. I put it on, I wore it to school, and part of me was like, if anyone asks why I look so much like a boy, I'm just going to tell them it's just a joke. I'm just jokingly addressing like a boy. 13-year-old me didn't make much sense. But I wore this outfit and I just felt so amazing. But I couldn't tell people that I felt awesome because this is who I really am. I was so proud of myself for doing this. I felt like I was really expressing myself in the way that I chose. But oh my God, I was so scared. I was scared how people would react. Luckily, nobody did. And it was a really great day. And then the following year, Avril Lavigne, she blew up. Her music became super popular. And guess what she wore? A tie. And guess what she sang? He was a boy and she was a girl. Can I make it any more obvious? So there's a straight, pretty girl who was pretending to be punk and singing about heteronormative crap. And my queer little heart was shattered because I'd put so much work and worry into standing out as myself. And there she stood, tie on, cool as hell, and totally heterosexual. Honestly, I held a grudge over Avril for like a decade because she stole my thunder as someone wearing a tie. But honestly, that anger that I had towards her was really anger that I had towards myself, because why did it take me so much? And why was I so afraid to wear this tie to school? And I couldn't go to my parents and tell them that this is what I wanted. I didn't know how. I didn't have the words. And my parents are cool. Like, don't get me wrong. They're awesome. And I don't think they would have said anything bad, but I just didn't have that inner sense of knowing who I was to feel safe enough to know that I could say what I wanted to say. And regardless of how they reacted, it wouldn't change who I am inside. I didn't have that. So if I shared with them what I was feeling and what I was going through, and they didn't understand right away, which, like, who does, especially at that time, I would have been broken, and I couldn't do that. And so I kept it all to myself. And that's what that anger was. And that's what all that anger was towards Avril Lavigne. It wasn't about her. How could it have been? All I was angry about was that she wore a tie. It was really about that I couldn't be me. And I was too scared to tell anyone what I was going through. I was 14 in 2001 when NDP MP Libby Davies publicly acknowledged that she had a female partner, becoming the first MP to come out in Canada. I was 14 when, for the first time ever, someone who looked somewhat like me was shown in leadership. But she was there all along. What did it take for her to come out? Safety, community, legal protection? Yeah. It literally took safety, community, and legal protection for her to be able to come out as an MP, just like Sven. But unlike Sven, it took another 13 years for a female MP to be able to feel safe enough to come out as a queer person. And I will remind you that in 2001, it was still not legal to be married. So Libby Davis could not marry her partner when she came out as an MP. An MP could not legally marry their partner. And I was 14. I was also 14 when I was introduced to something new, the internet. My parents got a computer and internet in our home. I seriously had no idea how dangerous the internet was, and neither did my parents. How could they know? This is a brand new thing, and it started off in universities. And to me, and I think to them, it was increasing our ability to do our homework, things like that. But there was no education in schools or anywhere about the dangers that youth, especially like myself, would face if they were on the internet. And there was certainly no legislation around the internet that would protect me or warn my parents or the people around me about how vulnerable youth were online. Facebook, YouTube, iPhones, and smartphones had not yet been created, but neither did the words cyberbullying or sextortion. One of the things about the internet is that you can choose to be yourself, you can choose to be anonymous, or you could choose to make up an entirely new persona. When I was 14, I found myself doing exactly that, going on the internet alone and trying on my true identity as a boy. But doing this caused me a lot of deep shame, and honestly, even talking about it now makes me nervous. But I should never have actually experienced it. But again, because this was a new thing, no one knew what was going on. I didn't feel like I could talk to anyone, and I felt shame, and I had no one to turn to about this. You think about the disaster that's waiting to happen in that combination. Between the ages of 14 and 15, a friend of mine actually introduced me to this online website where you create a character and you play a game. It was actual game. And then there was a chat room. And the original idea was that the chat room was a place for you to role play your character in the game. You know, medieval fights, and like you were a knight or you were a dragon. At the time, honestly, I was falling in love with writing. And at first I created female characters, but very quickly I created male characters. And I was scared of ever being caught because I was so embarrassed. And at first I convinced myself that I was doing this for the sake of writing, but it very quickly evolved into something more. And I realized how much it excited me being seen as a man and interacting with the world as a man. And but I was 14, and then there was no catfishing word hadn't even been invented yet. And I had no idea what I was doing. I was lost and unguided in my life. I found myself online and unprotected, looking for answers by talking to adult strangers across the world and in ways that no 14-year-old ever should. Yeah, I know. I shudder at the thought myself. And because I was embarrassed and ashamed at wanting to be a man and how good it felt to feel aligned with these people online, I couldn't get myself out of it. But I was a child. But as an adult looking back, I realized there's no way that they believed me. They did not believe that I was a grown-ass man. They knew I was a child. And they took advantage of my vulnerability. I was a sitting duck, and I got myself into some serious trouble. Thankfully, my friend confronted me the next day at school. I died on the spot when she mentioned it. She said, "Are you pretending to be a boy online?" And I said, "No." And then I completely ended everything. I stopped. And if it wasn't for my friend confronting me, I don't think I ever would have thought I could get out of it. But the realization that this online life had now interacted with my real life, it was so overwhelming that I just put it all away. And I said, I can't believe this happened. I'll never do this again, ever. And throughout all this experience and as I aged, my interest in women, romantic interest in women, was just getting stronger. Like that's where a lot of this evolved into. And online, I could be with women as myself, as a man. But in real life, I had no transgender role models, no depictions in media aside from Is It a Man or a Woman episodes on Mary Povich. Don't get me started. But I didn't think being a man in real life was an option. And it was soul crushing. It was not possible for me. I thought about it, and in my head, it wasn't possible. And no, I didn't Google how to become a man, which I kind of wish I did, because I think in 2002, I probably would have found some stuff about trans people on the internet. So I kind of do wish I'm a girl, how do I become a boy was something I searched on the internet, but I didn't. And I was crushed. It was all over. And now I have to live my real life as a teenage girl in Canada. But that's not to say I had a bad life. I had best friends, and I was actually starting to fall for one of my classmates. And if I wanted to be with women in real life, I had to accept, and I quote, who I really was, unquote. What society told me that I was a woman and a lesbian. By 16, everyone around me was starting to date. I started puberty at this point. My body was fully betraying me, and the dysphoria was just ramping up. Over the next year, my breasts would go from small B's to D's. So picture this young little boy, 16 years old, now has breasts and is menstruating. The differences between me and my male cousin could it be bigger at this point? And yet I felt more like him than like me. The confusion and shame and embarrassment from how I felt inside when my friends would talk about boys and how they felt about boys compared to the way I felt when I looked at them, I was so confused. They would say things, wasn't that boy cute? Are you going to date anyone? Who do you like? I didn't know how to tell them. I didn't even know how to know if it was true. And I was confused because when I looked at boys, I would feel something, but it wasn't necessarily attraction. It was like admiration and appreciation in a sense. Like I wish I was him instead of I want him. And so there were boys in my school that I looked at and was like, yes, this is the boy. But when I would think about him as a person and me as a person, I was like, ew, I want nothing to do with him. I want him far away from me. And I don't even like talking to him. But I like the way he looks, and I like the world he's built for himself, and I like the girlfriend he has, and I like the life he has. And so it was confusing because I didn't know if I wanted to be him or be with him. And I didn't know how to tell anyone that because I had heard the word gay millions of times throughout my life, especially in school. But did I hear it from a teacher who would use it to discuss the beautiful myriad of identities and expressions that humans and millions of other creatures on this planet have? No, of course not. Did I read it in a book that I got at my school library that talked about families like me or the experiences of students like me or helped me understand who I was as a person, helped me become stable and confident? No. It was 2003. I heard, that's gay, every single day. As an insult, as a slur, it was used to mean, that's bad. How could I not have felt shame and confusion about my sexuality? I had never experienced any proper education about my identity under the ruse of quote unquote keeping kids safe. And yet the kids around me in school were the worst perpetrators of homophobia, and I was just about the furthest from safe that I could possibly be. Despite hearing that's gay every single day and having been called gay myself a few times, I had no idea what it meant in reality and what it meant for me or anyone else to be gay. Never mind transgender. The word transgender had never entered our lexicon. Where was someone like me to go for information, guidance, or help in discovering who I was and loving myself? It would have been so much better for me to have people in my life that I knew were safe to talk about this stuff, but I didn't feel like I had anyone. But it wasn't because of them or anything that they had necessarily done. I had seen enough media on TV to tell me that my parents would reject me, or worse, be violent, kick me out on the street. And what would I have to do to survive? Sex work, addiction, and potentially suicide were all real possibilities for me because they were happening to queer people every day to this very day. I was only 16 and I didn't think I could take the risk. This was not a conversation that we had had openly in my house. And so I had no idea what was going to happen or where to even start. And I was too afraid of being rejected because I didn't know who I was and I wasn't stable in that sense of self. Talking to my friends about being queer or how I was feeling inside, to me, wasn't an option. Again, because I was worried about the kind of rejection I would face if I outed myself. Again, mostly from media. What I saw and what I heard was telling me that I could not be gay or I could not be a man. And that if I was, I would be rejected and I wouldn't have friends. I wouldn't get married. I wouldn't have a partner. I wouldn't have a life. I was going to be dead. So I had no sense of being able to live as me going forward from 16, and I couldn't take any risks. I was terrified that my life was going to explode, and I wasn't even sure of who I was. How could I have been? How could I have been? How could I? By the time I was 16, think of every 16-year-old you know right now. Just hold that person in your thought. Gay people weren't allowed to get married or adopt children. How could I know what kind of life I was going to lead? How could I have dreams for myself? How could I have dreams? This was 2003. That's when the British Columbia Court of Appeal made the unanimous decision that limiting the definition of marriage to heterosexual couples violated equality rights. So maybe I could have a future with love in it. I signed up for my first online social media / dating website at 17 years old. In the sign up form, it asked, are you gay, straight, or bisexual? Are you a boy or a girl? I was confronted for the first time with the opportunity to reflect and to ask myself, who am I? What do I want from my life? Having spent the first 17 years growing up in a world with no representation for a queer person like me, with no possible vision into the future, and no idea who I even was at the time, how could I know what I wanted for my life and for my future? So I chose bisexual at the time. And I truly believed that I was bisexual. I assessed the fact that I was very attracted to women. And I also found that when I looked at men, I had a certain feeling inside of me. And so I put bisexual, not realizing that the feeling I felt towards men was complex. And so to me, as a 17-year-old with no concept of what that really means, I said my sexuality is bisexual. But one of my friends was also on the website, not really good at hiding things. And so she, again, same person, confronted me. She was like, hey, are you bisexual? It says so on the website. And I was like, no, not bisexual. No. I just put that to scare off the boys. Again, not a good liar. So how would that scare off the boys? Doesn't make sense. But that's what I said. So she kept pressuring me. And my other friends would ask me. And she'd be like, I already know. Just say that you're gay. Like, just say it. It's fine. And I was like, I can't. I couldn't say it. I denied it over and over. And then I couldn't. And then one day, my friend tells me she actually got kissed by a girl. And I was surprised. And then I said, on a whim, you've kissed more girls than I have, and I actually like girls. And she said, you do? And I was like, oh crap. I just came out. And by this point, I had really accepted myself. And so it just came out because I had decided to let it go. Probably because of how many times it came up and it came up and it came up. And then one day I just blurted out, nope, I'm actually gay. And then whoop, that was it. And so I was able to start living openly as gay, or at least as bisexual because of this experience with my friend, at least. It was a start of the acceptance, right? And so I actually started dating somebody that I met on this website. And in my grade 12 year, I came out to my mom well, she confronted me again. She would come over every once in a while. And then one day my mom said, "Is that your girlfriend, Teri?" And I said, yeah. And she sat quietly for a moment and my heart was thumping out of my chest. And she goes, "Boy or girl, no sex in my house." And that was literally it. And we've never really had discussions about sexuality or sexual experiences. Remember, my parents had no exposure to queer adults and therefore had no idea how to keep their queer kids safe in the dating world. Who could tell them or me what is or isn't proper behavior in a queer relationship? And even the fact that this person was a couple of years older than me, like that concern didn't really come up to my parents because there was no conversations about what queer relationships were supposed to look like, right? They've been modeled straight relationships in a very patriarchal society. So an older person dating a 17-year-old was normal, right? And like, so once again, I was learning through doing without really consent. Is that informed consent? It's not. So I had to learn by doing, not to mention the fact that I am a trans man and I was trying to have relationships as a lesbian. Like, people don't really understand the differences and how your gender identity comes out in your sexual experiences when they're repressed. And these combinations of these experiences and this lack of identity and this lack of knowledge, it prevented me from staying safe. Like, I was doing things that I didn't actually want to do because I didn't know that wasn't what I wanted. And I could make choices for myself in relationships, right? These things aren't talked about, even with straight kids, never mind with queer kids. This guise of keeping kids safe from this monster of sexuality and queerness. I was once again, as a queer kid, the furthest from safe that I could have ever been, and placed directly into the arms of harmful people who did harmful things, perpetuated from probably the harm that they experienced. I can share this experience now just to tell you that you are not keeping anyone safe by holding information away from them. You are not keeping anyone safe by not telling them things they need to know and explaining them into a way that they can understand. Things will happen to them without their consent if you don't educate them. This is my experience. It wasn't until I was 18, graduating from high school in 2005, that Canada became the fourth country in the whole world to officially sanction same-sex marriage nationwide. This means that despite being born into a world of violence and discrimination against queer people, despite no queer representation throughout my entire childhood, and despite no education or guidance of what it means to be queer, I am still queer. But instead of being happy, knowing myself, feeling included, kept safe, and having a worry-free childhood where I could focus on my academics, I was lost, confused, alone, put into harm's way, anxious about not having any kind of future, and constantly vigilant about protecting myself and my truth or risk losing everything. I'm just lucky that I'm still here. I was only 18 and this had already been my whole experience. I still had no idea what it meant to be transgender, and the dysphoria was eating me up inside. And though because I was openly gay in my high school, there was one or two other gays who I met and came out, and I'm so glad that I was able to have that connection with them, and at least a little bit. But because I was openly gay, one of my closest friends told me that I was disgusting and she didn't want anything to do with me. And those friends, by the way, they told her that she doesn't get to be a part of our friend group anymore if that's the way she believes. And that was it. She was gone. And she was one of all of our best friends. But because of her beliefs, not because of me, but because of her beliefs, she was out. So school got better as I became out and was open and honest, but I was still very naive and I was still very dysphoric. But despite all that and my ADHD, I did actually fairly well in school, even though I personally felt like I could have done better. And although I had one math teacher who still works in the schools, she was the only one who taught me the way I knew how and allowed me to use my skill set to apply it back in math. So I actually had computer courses that I was allowed to use to apply to math, and that I got an A in math for the first time in my entire life because she saw me for all of who I was and supported all of me to work together. But other than that, I was just left alone. I got B's and whatever. And my difficulties with numbers and math and my interest in art and computers meant that I avoided academics and ventured into a blossoming new field, graphic and web design. I graduated in 2005, but as I got closer to the end of my grade 12 year, that's when I cut all my hair off. I asked my mom if I could, and she agreed. I cut it short, originally just like a little bob, and then shorter, like a pixie. And then I just cut it all the way short to what you see now, like a very mask, but like cut. And it made me feel so euphoric. I felt like I was quote unquote visibly queer. And that made me happy. I was butch, masculine. And I finally felt like I could be seen for who I was. And I felt seen. So on the precipice of entering my life as an adult, I had slowly started to take ownership of myself. Despite my newfound visibility, as I went into college, I was still trying to hide my true self. I met and developed friendships, and I never told them that I was attracted to women. I just tried to be me, to show them who I was, so that they would love me too much to leave me if they didn't approve of my quote-unquote lifestyle. But it didn't work. It turns out that I don't actually want to be friends with people who don't really accept me or aren't willing to be open-minded about who I am as a person. The worst memory I have of being in the closet was a time in college when a teacher was talking about queer people. I actually don't really remember why he was talking about queer people. But I was developing a friendship with somebody, and she whispered to me as he was talking, disgusting. My little queer heart shattered, but I couldn't show it or risk outing myself. This is the same patterns repeating themselves, but this time I'm 18 and I'm in college and I have a job and I live with my parents. I pay rent. I take the bus. I'm learning to drive. I'm on my way to becoming an adult, and I'm still hiding and lying and feeling shame and trying to make friendships and trying to prove to people that I'm lovable and trying to prove to people that I'm good enough just by being me and just by giving them everything that they want from me and not asking too much from them. And by the way, this was an art school, the Art Institute of Vancouver. Okay, this girl, long story short, she didn't even make it through the program. She dropped out. But I just couldn't believe it. Like, I'm out of school. I'm in a space of my own choosing. I am visibly masculine. I'm very visibly queer in my opinion. And here she is telling me that being gay is disgusting. And I couldn't even tell her off because I was too afraid of losing her friendship. What the hell? But I couldn't do that anymore. That was it. I was done living in the closet. I couldn't do that anymore. I promised myself that I wouldn't make friends with people who didn't love me for me, like didn't love all of me. This was the first time that I embraced my radical authenticity. But I'm going to tell you that it's a journey, as you've seen. It's a journey. And so I became one of those people who would loudly and proudly introduce people to girlfriend. I would make points of holding hands and kissing in public. I would even be borderline obnoxious when I knew people were a little homophobic. But now, as a masculine presenting trans man, introducing people to my girlfriend and kissing and holding her hand in public kind of feels like a weird flex. See, it took me a while to realize how I was perceived and how our life experiences and stories aren't seen by the people who don't know us. So when I go out now as a trans man, people have no idea that we're both queer and that we're both gender fluid, and that being in public as ourselves, kissing and holding hands, is a really big deal to us and to our community. It's why I have to be radically authentic and why I am always proud of who I am. If I'm not fully seen, you won't truly understand me. And understanding is the root of belonging. And so from basically college onward, I was an openly proud lesbian and a butch one, very masculine presenting. And I was proud of all of the masculine things that I did. This is just who I was. I wasn't going out of my way to be masculine. I was just a masculine woman in my mind. And then I started dating a girl, she was from the interior of BC and I was from the coast. And it was a long distance relationship at first. And then I moved to the Okanagan to be with this person. And their parents were very Christian and they didn't actually believe in being gay. They believed it was a sin and that was something that you could overcome. Even though they accepted me in their home, they accepted me in their daughter's life, and they clearly cared about me, they didn't ultimately want their daughter to be with me. But when we eventually broke up, I actually ended up working with their parents for a little while, and they said that one day their daughter is going to find the right man and they'll get married and have a family, and that'll be that. After the Okanagan relationship, I moved back to the coast and I met someone else. We were together for about 6 years, and over those 6 years, it was turmoil, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of emotional issues because of all my experiences and being rejected and abandoned and not supported and not really cared for, not really seen. I felt like they needed me and they were never going to leave me or abandon me because they literally couldn't. And this is codependency at its finest. And so every time this person needed something, I was like, I'm going to push them. I'm there for them. If I need to run up my credit, I'll run up my credit. And so like I had so many issues by just being so codependent with this person, which is from my own insecurities, that I would be rejected and not loved by anyone else. So this was when I moved to Chilliwack. I originally moved to Chilliwack before I started transitioning, and I came out here to live off the land and to be completely away from the systems that I felt were really oppressing me, and to try to truly understand what the heck life was about, what it meant for me, and why was there so much bloody suffering. And so to me, the only way to do that was to just strip away all of life and to just live raw, if you will, live hard. Where my mom just moved, and she retired and she moved out here and she met someone, and I moved out here to be closer to them and tried to find somewhere to settle where we could actually farm. And we found a spot in Yarrow. We cleaned up. It was half an acre. We cleaned it up. I think we cleaned up like a few feet of it. She was like, if you really want the spot, you have to prove it to me. You have to clean it up. It was full of blackberries. And like, we had no equipment. It was literally just me and her and a rusty shovel. Like we had nothing. And so we like, between the shovel and a rake and some gloves and some scissors or whatever, we cut back like several feet of bramble and we cleared it up. And it was just enough space for us to put our like trailer, but not enough to clear the whole thing. And she goes, okay, you've proven it to me. We'll get this land cleared for you. Because they actually had a backhoe. And so they came and they cleared out the land like from the brambles. They cleaned it up. But we managed to live there for over a year. And I got a job at a local organic farm. And this is where I had friends who were really open with me about these concepts and were talking with me about them and were challenging me on them. And so moving out to this farm, this organic farm specifically, I learned, we're just working against nature and we're fighting against nature instead of working with nature. And when we work with nature and understand nature and have a harmony with nature, things go better. And I really thought that the world was perfect and that God made us all perfect. And that's why I couldn't transition, because I was born the way I was supposed to be born. And I'm sure you've heard this before. You were born perfect. God made you perfect and you don't have to change yourself. There's no such thing as perfect. It's no such thing as perfect. Even working on a farm, you would think that everything in nature would be perfect. The best part about living on the farm is realizing every single thing nature made was near perfect. And that's when I realized like nature becomes what nature becomes because of our interaction with it. And we are not unique from it. We are not separate from it. We are one with it. And if it is imperfect and it can become what it wants to become, then the land taught me that I can be who I am because that's what I was meant to be. And it is through this experience and finding myself in the soil and understanding why things are the way they are, and just how much waste comes from a single small farm, showed me that our food systems were a mess because it was all about profit and not about actually feeding people. And all my values just started to come so alive in this space when I realized like everyone could be fed tomorrow if we decided we could feed people. And that suffering was intentional because we believed in scarcity. Because I believed I couldn't ever be a man, I forced myself through the scarcity of never getting to truly be myself and express myself. And it was just such a profound experience that I'm so grateful for it, even though it was one of the hardest times of my life. And I really just got to the point where I was like, I can't handle this anymore. Like, I'm haunted by the feelings that I had when I was living my life online as a man in my teens. I knew in my heart that was what I wanted. I wanted to live like a man. I would say the most transphobic things, but they were really towards myself. Like, I can never be a man. People cannot change their gender. People just need to accept themselves for who they are. That was just the things I was telling myself. Eventually, I realized that these things just aren't right. And I knew that I had to do something about it. But I also believed in my heart it was impossible. I had never seen a transgender man assigned female at birth medically transition. I lacked self-worth, so I didn't take care of myself. I accepted the love I thought I deserved because I didn't think that I mattered or deserved anything better. And I didn't believe that I belonged anywhere, especially not to myself. I didn't belong to myself. I did not get to make decisions for me. The world made decisions for me, and I just had to live with them. And I didn't even get to share how I felt or what I wanted because I would never get it. What's the point? So just suck it up. Anyone else who does anything differently, there's something wrong with them because this is what I have to do. This is basically the heart of transphobia. Like, anyone who says transphobic things, it's probably because that's what they're telling themselves. It's the same thing. I have to accept this. I have to live like this. I can't express how I feel, so everyone else should be in the exact same place as me. Otherwise, my truth isn't true, and I'm only lying to myself. So the internet became my savior. The very same place that I found myself in trouble as an adolescent, I found refuge in as an adult. First, it was YouTube, then Facebook, then Vine, then Instagram, then TikTok. They all have become a platform for queer content creators to share their stories directly to the people who need to hear them. And finally, they were able to reach someone like me, a sheltered, privileged little white lesbian from a divorced family living in rural British Columbia. I remember the first time I saw a transgender man on YouTube and the testosterone changes he experienced throughout his medical transition. His name is Jamie Rains. It was 2015 and I was 26 years old. I remember this moment very, very explicitly. I watched his video of his transition from female to male. I could not believe it. I literally could not believe it. Everything that I had told myself up to that point, everything I believed, every lie I had swallowed that I could never be a man melted out of my body in the very moment I watched that 30-second video. I think my entire body melted into a puddle on the floor. That's how it felt. I couldn't believe it. This is a real thing. I can be the man I've always wanted to be. Little 14-year-old me in a tie was so happy. In 2015, gender identity and expression were still not protected under the Canadian Criminal Code. So here I go of round 2. Coming out, hiding in the closet, lying, shame, secrecy, pretending, wondering, will I ever be accepted? Will I be loved? Who will love me as a trans person? Will I be safe when I go on a date? Will I be able to work and grow my career? Will I continue to face government-sanctioned discrimination and violence, but only now based on my gender identity and expression, when I had only just gained rights for my sexuality as a lesbian woman? Never mind the fact that I was currently in this relationship where I thought this person would never leave me. Will this person even accept me? I was able to transition because they introduced me to the very first trans man I ever met in my life. He handed me a book. I literally still have it. And in there, him and his friend wrote down a bunch of things that they had done to transition. And they helped me set out on my way. They gave me the number of the clinic to call. And I called the clinic. I didn't even call my GP. I couldn't take the risk. I had known that GP since I was 5, and he was my entire family's GP. I hadn't told anyone in my family that I'm trans. I need to figure this out for myself before I tell anyone, because if I don't know who I am and I can't accept myself, then how can I expect anyone else to accept me? And God forbid they say anything about me and I don't know yet. I could be gaslit into accepting something about myself that I haven't yet experienced. So I just needed all the space to figure this out on my own yet again, because I didn't know who I was and I was scared. And so I phoned the trans clinic. I was also able to drive myself to the clinic, take the day off work, pay for the gas, the trip, everything. So it's extremely privileged for me to be able to just phone a clinic and go to the clinic and get help. And so, yeah, I was scared. I was terrified about what I was about to lose yet again. But luckily for me, I was able to explore my gender identity on my own. And I started to really accept myself and embrace myself as a man. I actually met my partner, my now partner. We're married. I actually came out to them very early on in our relationship. I had learned from my previous experiences that I don't want to fall for somebody and then have my heart broken because they can't be open to me or to learning more about me. And so I came out to them. I said, I am going to the trans clinic. I don't want to change my name. I knew I wanted to remove my breasts. Like, it was a huge thing for me. Growing up, they were one of my biggest causes of dysphoria. But my partner asked me, well, what about pronouns? I said, I really want to try he, him. Like, I've always wanted to be seen as a man. Like, I can't explain it. So I tried it with just them. They were like, cool, okay. And they called me he, him. They called me handsome. They affirmed my gender in every way that they possibly could. And so the affirmation was everything, like everything. It was just a little bubble of where I got to be me, fully me. And in that bubble, it took me no more than a few days to realize, damn, like, this is it. I was so much happy being seen as the man I really am and affirmed in that like I knew. I didn't have to accept being assigned or prescribed my identity by doctors or government or policy or society anymore. Only I get to decide. And it's always been that way. I was the one who decided what I was and how I expressed myself. It was me. Of course, the decisions were influenced by everyone around me and my age and my knowledge, but it was still my decision. And this is my decision now. I get to decide who I am and what I want to do and what I want to be based on what my heart is telling me. But I could also have decided to continue to hide. I could have decided to put it away for longer, to bury it deep inside and to continue to hide and to lie and to live in shame. But I couldn't. It was causing me so much turmoil. Like, at this point, I was 26. 26. Like, most of my life I had lived not being allowed to be myself, not having access to even knowing what that was, not having anyone explain it to me, having to live personally through trauma to understand what I do and do not want and what is and isn't okay. How was I ever supposed to build a life for myself when I was going through all of that? And so when it came time to start my hormone therapy, I was ecstatic to fully embrace myself and become my true self. The man I knew I was at 3, at 8, 11, and at 14. I'm a man and I am transgender. And none of the decisions that I made would change that. It's who I always was. It's who I've always been. I just didn't have the words to express it or the knowledge to even know where to start. It is not in my name or in my hormones or in my surgeries that make me who I am. It is who I was at birth and who I will be at death. It is me. It is my identity. And that was all that mattered. I was starting to really embrace my authenticity and no longer feel the deep shame about who I am that I've experienced my entire life because I wasn't allowed to be me. The opposite of shame is pride. And so for me, living with pride was going to be how I lived the rest of my life. It wasn't until 2016 just about a year after I came out as trans, when gender identity and expression were finally added to the Canadian Human Rights Code. Think about this. 27 years, almost 30. 27 years of trying to be my true self in the face of government-sanctioned violence and discrimination against me and others like me. 27 years of searching for meaning, for reflections of myself and my community and my world. 27 years of being kept in the dark, pushed into the arms of predators with no support, no resources, and no education. Not for me, not for my family, and not for my friends. But maybe now, with this new legislation, maybe now there would get to be a future with me in it. All of me, the whole me. I met a friend who had a son and he was transitioning from female to male. But unlike me, who was 27, he was 7. And he had gone through the process of changing his name, his pronouns, and he was able to wear his clothing and hair however he pleased. His mom was terrified, but she stood up for him. And because of this, she faced vitriol and violence. She faced being called horrible names and hearing her son being called horrible names. She faced being told she was a bad mother and that she was abusing him. And despite all of that, despite all that she was doing to protect him and make sure that he was represented and cared for in schools, he still faced bullying from his peers. He was constantly outed by his peers and his teachers, being made to feel unsafe and unwelcome in his school environment, and he couldn't just live his life as the child he is. He was 7, right? So despite decades of change and legal protection, social growth, peer-to-peer support, human rights, healthcare, and more, I was facing the exact same pushback at 27 that this little boy was facing at 7. Now, let me tell you, when I first met him, what I felt by seeing him get to live his true life as a child with his parents, him being able to openly tell his parents how he felt and them just like being like, cool, yeah, we got you. Oh, it was a profound catharsis. So I'd be damned if I could stand idly by while his life was derailed at an early age to live a life of struggle in the same way I did. In 2019, along with the other trans people and allies in our community, we held the first ever Pride event in Chilliwack. So it's funny to look back on it actually, because the world had been experiencing more and more and more violence. And we'd just seen Pulse nightclub shooting. We'd seen people drive into crowds of protesters. And so the idea of hosting an event really scared me, especially in Chilliwack, because we'd never really seen Chilliwack be very queer friendly. At the time, we thought we'd see maybe 100 people, but what we ended up seeing was over 700 people pour in from across Chilliwack and the Fraser Valley to celebrate the very first Chilliwack Pride Festival. This had come after almost 2 years of fighting for inclusion in schools. And so this Pride Festival was essentially to make sure people in Chilliwack knew that Chilliwack actually was full of queer people. And so to see over 700 people pour in, it just goes to show that more and more people who've both moved to Chilliwack and who grew up here are open, and they want change, and they're willing to accept, and not only accept but embrace the queer people who live here and create a society that includes everybody. So at this point in my life, I had been somebody who really felt that who I was as a person was broken, not good enough. All of this internalized experience had really starting to, I guess, be healed because of this experience in this Chilliwack community, and being able to be so just completely open. Not only am I a queer person who lives in Chilliwack, I am the queerest person to ever live ever. And I just wore that like a badge of honor. So being a part of this Pride Society and being so visibly a part of this community, a lot of people were pointing to me and saying, it's Teri. Teri did it. They'd raise me up and they'd congratulate me, and they'd cheer for me, and they would bring me in the room. And that really made me uncomfortable. On one hand, part of me is like, yay, I'm being seen. I belong. I matter. People care about me. I'm good enough. But that's where things hinged, because growing up feeling not good enough for who I am, and implicitly for who I am, period. And then the dichotomy of what I was experiencing as a leader in this community, it was like a breaking point. And the more people lifted me up, the more I felt like I had to prove that I was worthy. And so I kept doing more. I kept taking on more and fighting harder and being louder. And then I had these incredible women and gender diverse people all around me, raising me up, telling me to get out of my head and to remind myself of all the kiddos who are on the line. And it was all of this together that made me decide to put my name forward for Chilliwack School Board trustee. And I became the first openly transgender man to be elected in all of Canadian history. But truthfully, I actually only accomplished this feat narrowly because Logan Oxenham was close on my heels. He actually became the first openly transgender man to be elected to the position of MLA in Manitoba, running with the NDP in Wabkinu. So to be honest with you, at this point in my life, I had no idea that I could ever run or be in any sort of position of power. Like I said, my entire life has been about not even being legally allowed to be me. It's never mind being in a position of power. And up until this point, there was maybe 3 or 4 openly queer leaders and people in power. So what does it mean to be the first openly transgender person to be elected in BC in a time when being transgender is only recently something that's allowed by our governments and society? Never mind being seen as an equal and valid way of being in a nation founded and shaped by patriarchal white supremacist ideologies. In the whole entire world, there have only been 6 openly transgender men elected to office, and all of that was only accomplished in the last 9 years. 6 transgender men elected in the last 9 years across the whole world. Think about that and why that is profound. In the same 9-year period, thousands of queer and transgender people have been murdered. Consider the disparity in those numbers. Thousands of murders, 6 elections. Why do you think that is? Now, when I tell you the importance of representation, I hope you understand. This is why I fight, it's why I'm visible, and it's why I'm radically authentic. I faced numerous doors preventing me from living my life as my true authentic self. Despite that, I have achieved great success being my authentically queer, neurodivergent self. I have created my own doors, I've even jumped through a couple windows. Whatever it took to get in the room and have my voice heard. Once I knew how life could be for all of us, I would not back down. What will the next generation or the generation after that, coming up with all the right information to keep them safe, to know that they matter and to know that they belong, achieve for this world? That vision is in your hands, my friends. So as leaders, as representatives, as people in community, as parents, as educators, as friends, and as family members, you hold the key to the doors of success for the next generation. What I need from you is to challenge your own personal biases and beliefs and fight for policies and laws that keep all of us safe from violence. So now we're getting to the end of my journey, the end of my story, because I'm still living it. I'm in my 4th year of my term as a school trustee, and I may or may not be reelected, but that doesn't change what I'm here for and what I'm doing, and the importance of making sure that schools are safe places that are inclusive of all students and their learning styles, that support them and love them, and give them a space where they can explore and become who they really are and know that they matter to that school and to that community and to those people. It makes a world of a difference to their lives. So wherever you are, walking, driving, resting, or just making it through the day, remember this. This world, this country, this land, this life, it is yours. It is all of ours together. And each of us as unique individual people belong here, and we matter and we make a difference by bringing our true, authentic, whole gifts to the world. And I ask you to be open-minded, to embrace each other, be curious, and to give yourself permission to be. Queer people are everywhere, and they've been throughout all of time, and you cannot erase what is human. Someday a young queer kid will listen to this. Maybe they'll be scared, maybe they'll be curious, but when they do, I want them to know this. We were here, we lived, we loved, and we refused to disappear. Thank you for listening to this story. They aren't really meant to wrap up neatly, because queer life doesn't always come with closure. But it does come with truth, with courage, and with the refusal to be erased. If what you heard today stayed with you, let it move you. Let it change how you see this place we call Canada, not as it claims to be, but as it is. Whether you're out, in, visible, healing, hurting, or just holding on, you belong. You're not broken, and you are not alone, and you do not need permission to take up space. We'll be back soon with more voices from the cracks, where queerness lives, breathes, and builds something new. Until then, remember who you are. Remember that you're not going anywhere. This is Rainbow Country.